Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Adina and I'm delighted to be introducing today's second Tech23 Impact Circle, which is going to be around exponential machines in heavy industries. It's wonderful to have you all join us for what's sure to be a great conversation. As is custom, I would first like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slattery's team meets, works, and creates. We pay our respects to the elders, both past, present, and emerging. We also acknowledge that people are attending today from other traditional lands and nations and extend our respects to their custodians, ancestors, elders, and future leaders. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Good afternoon, Rachel.
Oh, hello, Adina. And yes, our second circle for the day as we go into the last week. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone who's joining us today for what promises to be a really fantastic conversation. I want to thank our generous contributors today and say hello and welcome them. Hugh, Gavin, Andrew, Sue, KP, Jawn, and Mike, who's going to be leading this wonderful conversation today. Again, welcome to everyone zooming in. One thing we like about Zoom is that we can bring people together from everywhere. So say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're zooming in from and what your interest perhaps is in this topic. Tech23 is all about amplifying the organisations and the individuals who are chipping away at some of the greatest challenges we face. This year, we are announcing yet again for the 12th year, 23 young innovative companies who will be the 23 for this year. So stay tuned. We'll be releasing those on Wednesday. We're also keen to see people this week. We're very excited, aren't we, Adina, that there's a long lunch being held for those lucky enough to be able to get to Sydney on Thursday. And we've also got our first face-to-face circle actually on Thursday morning at the Sydney Startup Hub, which might be the start of something for the future. None of this could be possible without our sponsors. So I just want to call out the Tech23 sponsors for 2020, Oz Industry, UNSW, Main Sequence Ventures with the help of CSIRO, New South Wales Government, Macquarie University, Addison's, ANSTO, and Cicada Innovations. I am so looking forward to hearing this conversation, eavesdropping on it, as I call it. And after Mike and the contributors share, we'll have a chance to ask our own questions, and time permitting, we'll be able to break into some smaller discussion groups. It's great to be connecting, isn't it, Adina?
That it is. Thank you, Rachel. Now, I just had a couple of items for housekeeping before we kick off. You would have seen in your reminder and in the Zoom chat now, there is a link to the Slattery's Community Charter, which is a great read if you need some guidance on the behaviour that is welcome and encouraged at the circles. We're also using a shared mural board, which we welcome you to add your squiggles and stickies and drawings to, or burning questions if you want, as we go. Please also ask any questions via the chat function in Zoom, as Rachel mentioned, or you might like to put up your hand to ask live. Now, we are recording this presentation and we'll make it available to everyone post-event so you can revisit and share later on. Now, as Rachel mentioned, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to every one of the Circle contributors and all the Tech23 sponsors and supporters for helping today's session and all of the Tech23 Circles come into being. We also want to thank all of you for dialing in to join us. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mike to kick things off. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for having us, Rachel and Adina. It's exciting. First of all, let me say this group of panel presenters could have easily been twice or three times the size. One of the things I discovered in starting to dig around in our heavy industries expertise was they're lurking, they're out there everywhere. And one of the things we wanted to talk about today was just the great success that Australia has actually had in deploying deep technology in heavy industries. And I think you'll get a good picture of that today. Just by way of background, I'm Mike Zimmerman, a partner at Main Sequence Ventures. And for those of you who don't know, our fund exists in partnership with the CSIRO to help create whole new industries out of Australia's best deep tech founders, as well as science and research. And one of our investment themes is actually called exponential machines. And in that area, we're focusing on backing the newest computing and communications platforms, as well as applied intelligent applications that unlock value in industries. And in that vein, we've invested in a number of companies. Emesent, Stefan is here today. Prescient, you'll hear from Andrew Harris from Laing, who helped birth that company, as well as Q Control, Morse Micro, and have some other investments in related spaces, Baraha, Mariota, Lumachain, all of them applying deep tech in some of our industries and putting Australia on the world map. And overall, the goal today is really to highlight and showcase and educate and inspire. I think as I've looked around at what different companies are doing, what researchers are doing, and what large corporates are doing, I think Australia doesn't take enough credit for all the excellence that is here. We are world leaders in innovating in heavy industry. We have been for quite a while, and we're gonna hear from some experts that have been there, some from the start, talking about AI, robotics, automation, as well as advanced sensing and other things. So with that, I'm not going to say too much more. We've got 8 amazing panelists, and we are going to have our furthest afield kick us off. KP from Brick and Mortar. Let me turn it over to you. What the heck are you doing on a panel about Australian heavy industries, and who are you?
Exactly. I couldn't sleep is the answer. So hello, everyone. This is KP from Brick and Mortar Ventures. I'm calling here from San Francisco. Give you a bit of background. So we are an early stage venture fund based in San Francisco that invests globally. We invest particularly in the vertical of construction. So I would call it across any types of construction. It goes from single family residential, multifamily residential, mining, it doesn't matter. We are interested in Australia for a few reasons. One, if I think about kind of our fund, we're not necessarily investors in technology. I would call us investors in problems that the built industry is motivated to solve. And what we found about Australia, what's interesting, is that it's an interesting mix of technical talent, entrepreneurship, and motivated industry players that are willing to take a chance and de-risk the investment enough for someone like an outside early stage investor to come in and make the bet. We've seen that interesting mix work out really well. In a way, I almost think, necessity is a mother of invention, and in a resource constrained environment, there's no other way but to invent your way out. We personally experienced that in one of our portfolio companies, Inomia, that came out of CSIRO. An Australian-led entrepreneur spun it out, and then multinational and local builders actually gave them a chance to de-risk the investment. So in a short version, even the companies that we have not invested, didn't come out of Australia. We talked about mining and automation earlier in the prep. One of our companies is Safe AI. The founder got their roots and their stripes in Australia. So I'll sum it with one sentence is, we made 2 investments in Australia so far, and we're bullish to make more. So that's what's exciting me.
Fantastic, KP. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm sure we'll come back to that. Hugh, I was hoping that you, given all the different hats that you wear and have worn, maybe you can just give us a quick, I guess, fly through of those, but more importantly, tell us why Australia is a leader in these fields and what experience it actually has. What's the track record?
So I've been involved in, I guess, heavy equipment automation since the late 1980s. And in fact, I originally came to Australia because when you look at it on a map, it's kind of the perfect place to come and automate. It is dominated by things like mining, materials handling, agriculture, and so on. And I'd already developed a large vehicle for moving containers in the UK well, I think it was a bit ahead of its time. But when I first came here, I mean, there were lots of things going on, but Chris Corrigan was interested in removing people from the waterfront. So I got to do the same project again. And the mining companies were certainly interested in automation. I don't think they've got the right story yet. And probably actually the very first large-scale robotics project in Australia was the underground automated LHD project that I did with Peter Cork and others in Queensland. So when I got underway here, you know, I tried to work quite closely with the mining industry at the start, but in the end, it was the waterfront that really took off first because of political motivations more than anything else. And we had an opportunity to build the automated straddle carrier system, Autostrad, that now runs at Brisbane. Indeed, has been running in Brisbane now for 13 years. So it's a long time. And now Porta Botany, Long Beach, the technology's got out there. And of course, back in the middle of 2000s, 2005, Rio started investing significantly in automation. And in fact, they did that on the back of looking at what happened at the Port of Brisbane on the grounds of, you know, the way automation works. I think perhaps the lessons here, I want to try and cut this a bit short, is about, you know, where does the money go, what the investments are. You've seen companies like Patrick's who have done a 30x increase in valuation on the back of automation. And yet we don't really always have the startup companies here or the companies that genuinely build and own the technology in the way perhaps they could. I think it was just the beginning of the opportunities. So I look at agriculture as a big one, but defense has really turned the corner, I think, now. And I think there are a lot of other areas, construction and so on, that I genuinely think the huge technology, the huge expertise there is in Australia now in field robotics and other areas could be applied to.
Terrific. Thanks, Hugh, for that whirlwind tour. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those questions about who gets the value and why. Actually, I wanted to go to you, Andrew. You're wearing a few different hats here. You're obviously affiliated with the University of Sydney, but I think more to the point today is you're sitting across the R&D labs at Laing O'Rourke, which is a UK headquartered company. And I wondered if you could share why you're investing in R&D in Australia, what you guys are doing, what you're working on that excites you, and if you could just put Australia in a bit of a global perspective, that would be great.
No worries. Thanks, Mike. Nice to see you, and nice to see everybody and read the names on the list, folks I know. And for those that I haven't met yet, I'm Andrew. I'm a professor at Sydney Uni, and I've been working with Laing O'Rourke, a little British headquartered construction engineering company, for about 10 years, helping them with innovation and R&D. Turns out that Laing O'Rourke runs all of its Horizon 3, the big disruptive stuff, out of a lab in Australia, in Sydney, in Australia. And lab's been going for 10 years. And it's interesting, it's here for a bunch of reasons. I think that the main one is that we have really good access to high quality talent in Australia. Lots of folks think that the reason for being of a university is the research that gets done. I think we have a different perspective on that. I think we value the students more highly than we value the research. And we can talk about that some more as well. So Laing O'Rourke has sort of 5 major disruptive technology horizons. We've heard Hugh talk about automation, robotics, computer vision just now. Hugh, I'm wondering how many shares you got from Patrick's for their 30 times return. We can talk about that in a breakout room if you like. So robotics, automation, computer vision, advanced materials, including the sort of new sustainable materials, carbon negative concretes and carbon negative cements and other materials in that vein. Digital and data technologies, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that sort of stuff. Sensors, Internet of Things, those sorts of platforms, they're a bit linked. Digital, broadly defined, again, digital twins, visualization, engaging with a virtual asset. And the last one is advanced manufacturing, and that usually comes down to 3D printing and additive manufacturing, that sort of stuff. And so inside the lab, there are about 160 active projects working across those 5 areas at various stages of deployment. Most of that focus is internal, so it's stuff that doesn't see the light of day in the public domain. But there are a few examples now, including one that Main Sequence led the exit from Laing O'Rourke for, a company called Prescient that's that Mike mentioned just now. And I see Kieran Mackenzie, Dr. Kieran Mackenzie, the Prescient CEO, is in the list today. If you're interested, Kieran can give you much more detail about Prescient later on. But it started out inside Laing, and we sort of run an entrepreneurship model. So we've got lots and lots of problem cases. You saw KP, or heard KP talking about the problems, not the solutions. And we agree it should be very much a problem-led approach. So we have a little black book that's as thick as a ream of paper that outlines big problems in construction. And then we go about solving the really big ones first. And one of those was around humans and machines coming into contact and getting hurt. And so Prescient is a company that solves that challenge using some very clever computer vision algorithms and a bunch of other hardware and stuff that goes with that. So lots of good reasons for doing big stuff in Australia. I agree, Australia probably leads the world and certainly can do in terms of the problems that are here, the opportunity that exists because of the geography and demographics of Australia, and the talent that we've got to solve those challenges. We can send them offshore. So that'll do for starters, I reckon, Mike. Thanks.
Andrew, terrific. Thanks so much. I want to come back to your problem list. That'll be fun to.
That's a very expensive problem list, Mike.
Hey, before we're going to shift over to success stories and what's working, but I just wanted to offer up, did anyone else want to just throw some ideas out of why Australia has that opportunity to be a leader? What's working here? Just help putting Australia in a global perspective. Gavin, I thought you might, or Sue, if you had any views there, else we'll come back to you. It's fine.
A little something for you from a historical perspective. So I grew up in the Pilbara throughout the sort of beginning and boom times of the mining industry, where we went from 3 mines as Rio Tinto, 2 as BHP, to where we are now, where we've got over 50 between the two of us. And so I've watched that automation journey over my whole life, and it's very much attached to the people, the demographics. It's a harsh environment, and we had 50 odd thousand people living in the Pilbara in the 80s to supply those 6 mine sites and ports, give or take a little, and we've got about the same now in the Pilbara. And so really, to get that 50 mine sites like we do now, we had absolutely no choice but to automate. And it started with large-scale rolling stock machines such as stackers and reclaimers. I remember when those first became automated, and the uproar, and this is going to mean less jobs, and a lot of the same things that we hear today in terms of the human fears about automation. But from a personal perspective, all I've seen it do is enable us to do more, and enable us to grow, and enable us to have better, more meaningful roles. Especially for me, myself, I started living off of a shovel, it's literally swinging a shovel as my first role in the mining industry. And now I get to do very cool digital innovation stuff. So I'm sort of that living proof, I guess, of that journey.
Fantastic. No, that's great, Gavin. Thanks for rounding that out. I'm going to suggest we jump over to our next topic. Of course, we can come back to things if you put your questions in the chat there, and we'll come back and try and get to you. But next, I wanted to just talk to some success stories of people who've had some success in taking technology and applying it. And first up, I'm going to show my bias and go to Stefan from Emesent. So Stefan, tell us a bit about Emesent's roots and how it got to be a world leader.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Stefan, CEO and co-founder of Emesent, and no, great to think that we have considered a success. We're still pretty young, only 2 years in, but things are going well. So happy to share a sort of a bit of the background. So myself and co-founder and a couple of the technical team were previously in CSIRO. For those that are not in Australia, that's Australia's sort of national research organization, which works with industry as well. And we were in the robotics program or robotics group in CSIRO, based here in Brisbane. The group works across robotics and autonomy in various domains. We were focusing on drones and drone autonomy, adding onboard sensing and compute to allow drones to sort of perceive the world in challenging environments and allow them to do more with less human intervention, I suppose. And we realized there was sort of potential, some of the tech we'd been developing, especially in challenging environments where there's no GPS. So we decided to spin out Emesent to commercialize that technology. And sort of the core product is called HoverMap, and that's a device which you mount onto a drone, which allows it to fly in GPS-denied environments beyond line of sight, beyond communication range, and capture very valuable 3D LiDAR data. Pretty early on, while we're still in Saro, we got sort of a lot of pull and traction from mining industry, because I realized this could potentially allow them to capture valuable data in inaccessible areas underground. So we started working with sort of mining companies as early adopters, and basically went from there. So yeah, a lot of pull from mining. Eventually closed the funding round with Main Sequence just over 2 years ago, spun out, and now we're at 56 people today, still growing, and have customers around the world in mining and other spaces. But obviously our sort of strong UVP is in mining, with this system deployed successfully for more than 2 years in numerous mines, and it's become a sort of essential part of mining operations in many cases.
Great, Stefan. Thanks. I like to call it showing my bias, sci-fi with an ROI.
Yep.
Anyway, great. So that's a good kickoff. Gavin, I'll come back to you in a minute to talk about maybe one of your sexiest projects. But Paul, why don't you tell us what you're up to? Hugh made the point in one of our warm-up sessions about the importance of not so much developing the technology, but actually integrating it and applying it. And it seems like you're an expert at that. So why don't you share a bit of what you're up to, if you would.
Well, I'm not quite sure that fits into the criteria of success, but I'll give you an indication of some of the challenges that we're currently trying to work through. So after spending some time in the US and looking at the way that they adopted autonomous vehicles, and not so much the technology itself, but the way that they worked with the various cities, the community, and the entire ecosystem to build a flourishing industry, looking at what can be done to replicate that here in Australia. So in the last 3 years, we've had 4 attempts at trying to do autonomous vehicle projects in Australia with varying degrees of unsuccessfulness. But each time we get a bit closer. So that in itself is, I suppose, is a success. And I think some of the fundamental challenges that we face in Australia is the approach that we've taken in terms of the regulatory process, and the way that we manage the introduction of technology, in the fact that we have a national body that deals with this. Now, the great advantage of a national body is that everyone applies by the same rules. The downside of having a national body at this early stage in the game is if you don't get it right, then nobody wins, and we're probably at that point. Which means it's fine if you're trying to do an autonomous shuttle bus across the shopping centre, or with a local council, or you're looking at bringing in some technology from overseas and trialling it in a set criteria. If you're trying to develop the technology in Australia, there is no avenue to actually do that. So there are a number of cities in the US and even in Europe where you have 1 or 2, even up to 6 autonomous vehicle companies operating on the road in a public environment. In Australia, we have 0. So there's no one actually operating with a domestically produced autonomous vehicle in the public space. And so there's some of the challenges that we work through to try and get one on the road. So now we have a new program that we're trying to roll out in Western Australia. We were looking at doing it in Queensland until COVID-19, and we're stuck in our own little world here. So we're looking at seeing if we can do that in Western Australia and developing a precinct where we can actually get autonomous vehicles on the road operating in a public sense.
Gotcha. Great, Paul. Thank you. Jawn, over to you. Tell us about AMLab. I think you're quite interesting. You come obviously from a mining background, now working primarily in shipping, and you've got the Asia connection as well with your Singapore company. So tell us about AMLab.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Jawn, just one of the co-founders of AMLab. So I guess AMLab, we just generically describe ourselves as a industrial robotics and machine vision company. And as Mike mentioned, one of our key focuses is on container terminals. And specifically what we're using is 3D laser scanning, 3D laser scanning technology in order to automate the ship-to-shore cranes. So these are the cranes that you see at container ports that pick up the containers from the vessel and put them onto the trucks. So 3D laser scanning is very common as a solution for self-driving cars. It's pretty common in the mining industry as well. And basically it's just a means to provide the machine vision and spatial awareness of what's around it. And I think that the reason why Australia was just such a good place to seed this technology is just because of the talent pool that we have around industrial automation here. I think the stats are something like Australia produces 60% of the world's mining software. And I think it's quite evident from the discussion so far that there's a lot of industrial automation happening in here, and it's really what we're good at. And you know, that's the theory side. The practice side of how we ended up running with the company was that when we did that first pilot trial, you know, it was a big one in a megaport in Asia. I guess we just had these like fresh eyes that were looking at this particular industry, but also the team had this experience from the mining sector where we did a lot of mega machine automation. And of course, the customer being a megaport, they've seen all sorts of attempts from basically the incumbents, and they picked the hardest problem for us to solve. And so all we had was this like 4-week trial where we were trying to demonstrate, you know, what our capability was. And at the end of the 4-week trial, we were basically told that, you know, what we demonstrated in 4 weeks, the incumbents have been trying to do for the last 4 years. So obviously for us, that was great validation. But it's also, I think it's also a great testament to like this natural inclination that we have in Australia towards technology that is, you know, solving problems and that has value. And I think I'm absolutely certain that Australia can punch well above its weight when it comes to industrial deep tech. And I think it's just because Aussies understand the need to invest in research and innovation.
Great. Thank you, Jawn. I'm going to use that entry into research and innovation to shift over to Sue, who's currently running as CEO of the Queensland AI, but prior to that has a long history in robotics. So Sue, I thought we'd ask you, you know, your perspective on what important role, what importance the research is actually playing in stimulating innovation here. You've already heard of CSIRO being involved in a couple of startups and spinouts, and University of Sydney as well. So yeah, tell us a bit about that, and also any areas of research that you're particularly excited about in this space.
Yeah, well, in my view, research's main role is actually in really demonstrating what is potentially possible in the future, because, you know, that is the time frame, you know, over what most researchers are focusing on. So, you know, what I I'm finding particularly interesting is how people are using machine learning in areas like robotics to, completely change the way that, they are looking at creating those technologies. So first using it to hunt through all of the huge amounts of information that we have about new materials that are being produced thanks to artificial intelligence every day, figuring out what's the best material to build things out of, then using machine learning to try and figure out, what sort of morphology that technology should take to do its job the best way, and then even using machine learning to train it how to do its job. And in that way, I think it really is just a way of helping people to imagine things that were previously unimaginable. So in my view, that's really the big value that research plays. And often it is a lead indicator of what is coming up on the horizon, because I think the example that Stefan gave with Emesent, it really was, in terms of trying to, push the boundaries of what companies could do using the current technologies, that some of these new things are discovered and then new opportunities come from that. And I think, when you look at an example like CSIRO, there's also been some really interesting developments in other sectors. So in a lot of the work being done in the environment, it's actually pushed where the boundaries of the technology, because we can't have scientists out collecting information everywhere in Australia because we just don't have enough people. And, that's led to a whole range of inventions that can be applied across all sorts of different sectors and, contributing into heavy industries even. So that's where I see the most important role that research can play, really just being a lead indicator of where some of the opportunities lie.
Mute, Mike.
Sorry, I need that T-shirt. You're on mute. Thank you, Sue. I was going to ask if Andrew, Hugh, or Gavin, you guys had any comments. Obviously, Andrew and Gavin, you're working with industry, but also probably have some overlap on the research side. And Hugh, the same thing, is tell us what's been working and what hasn't been working when it comes to industry and research working together.
I've got a bit of an example that I can share really quite briefly. We're working with Emesent and Hrabar at the moment out on one of our mine sites, and most of you will probably be aware of the Jukan incident where we blew up a cave belonging to traditional owners. And so, that's really quite important to us that we never do that again. And we need to be able to look people in the eye and show that we are really quite genuine in that aspect, right to the point of going to the edge of what's experimental to understand what's in those caves. And Stefan's team has been absolutely fantastic in that. When I pulled up the bat phone and said, "Can you help me? I've got another cave and it's 2 minutes after Jukan and I really need to get this right." And they've been incredible. And so, for me, the importance of being able to work with startups to solve massive challenges in a timely manner, can't be understated for an organization like mine, because we're big and we're slow and we're bureaucratic. And the only people that I can pick up the phone and get a really high quality experimental top of the tree technology solution from is the startup scene, is the external commercial entities. There's no one in my business that I can bat phone. So that's one of the examples that I wanted to share. And then the second one, just to get a little bit experimental as well, just briefly, to get those sort of juices flowing, is around the space industry that I'm doing quite a bit of work with at the moment, which is really burgeoning here in Australia. And not necessarily to mine off-world, it's not for that, but the space industry has to solve some really fascinating challenges over the next 10 years to be able to mine. And that's to be able to mine using zero water off-world. That's a massive challenge for us in the mining industry. We've been sort of making very slow incremental steps towards it. But the space industry with water, with low power processing, with smaller, more specific targeted processing that incorporates remote sensing, all those things combined will make for better outcomes here on Earth, where we impact the environment a lot less. So that's the example that I'd like to share.
Fantastic. Oh, cut in from space. Yeah, KP.
Yeah, I was going to add to a couple of things. One, we thrilled to hear kind of you took a resource constrained environment and made it even more difficult, right? So I think that's pretty interesting to see. And we personally, have invested in or learned from underwater robotics and space. So we're thrilled to hear this space. But I think one part I would highlight here is having organizations that can work with startups. I think that has always been a challenge at least in construction industry. And when the first, solutions that arrived in our industry, they were mostly digitized version of a paperwork, paper flow process, whatever you call it. So that's an easy app. I think that was an easy low-hanging fruit for people to go address. What we are talking about here are actually deep tech innovations where you have robotics, where you do need a partner organization that can help you test your technology in the wild, learn from it. and do it in a way that is constructive to the startup, and not expect, you can bat phone, but you also expect like, hey, it may not be a fully baked product. This may be somewhere between the full spectrum of commercialization. So I think we often call it, internally a lighthouse partnership. And we're always looking to figure out which geographies have such lighthouse partners, large corporations that have the muscle that they've developed to work with early stage startups. Because it's not necessarily an easy muscle to develop. At least in our experience in our industry.
Yeah, and I would say that our muscle is not mature. Very, very few people do that, and it's been incredibly hard for me to get a lot of this experimental work brought onto our sites. But that's something we need to get better at, and I think the senior leadership is starting to realise that. So those space equipment are coming to a site. We're going to pay for all of that. We're going to enable them to go to where they need to be to get the most out of their particular innovation and learn the most from it. And the podiatry particular example, it's another sort of opportunity, I guess, for the DARPA team to do some more work there. And I'm really happy to help facilitate it to their advantages, not ours. So we're just hoping to glean a little bit more information than we might normally, but at least give it a red hot go. To use the latest in technology and what's out there.
And Gavin, is it not also true that your group, which is called the Pioneer
Lab, yep.
Pioneer Lab. So you're almost a little bit of a sandbox, are you not, to work on these types of solutions? And does that help free a startup from having the kind of normal entanglement you might have with a big corporate?
Yeah, so we become the bridge across the silos internally, and we roll up directly to the CEO and the executive committee. And so we've got broad authority to be able to make these changes. However, in saying that, it was the brainchild of our CEO who is now being sent down the road. So I don't know what the Pioneer Lab looks like beyond 2020, to be honest. I don't have high hopes for that. But at least on a personal level, where I am, I'm going to try and bring the spirit of the Pioneer Lab to wherever I am as best I can. So we'll see how that plays out in the new year.
Great. Hugh, please.
So let's talk about this commercialization pipeline in these big industries, right? I mean, the one thing that's always hit me is, we work a lot with big end users, and, it's okay to play in the startup space, and my lab founded a lot of startups, but we always have this slight disconnect because we're not building trucks. Do you know what I mean? We're not subcontracting to RIA, we're subcontracting to someone else or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And Sue brought this up early on, why the technology ultimately went to Kalmar around the straddle carriers, right? And in that case, what happened was, I'd already had a startup company that built the automated vehicles for the ports that I developed in the UK. And truthfully, although they were technically good, they were not good businesses, right? When I came here, Chris Corrigan founded the company. We had a company called Patrick's Technology that owned the IP, that developed the radars and the guidance systems and everything else. And they kind of commercialized what went on. And in effect, what happened was when Patrick's went through new ownership, that company was sold to Kalmar. Does that make sense? Because in effect, it's very hard to sell automated straddle carriers if you don't build straddle carriers. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
So you're in a bit of a tricky boat with these sorts of things. I mean, what in the end is going to be your product? Is it going to be automation systems? Is it going to be the implementation of automation if you're, say, a construction company? Or is it going to be the startup who actually provide pieces of the right technology that someone is actually going to do the systems integration around? Because, or do you actually work with someone like the Caterpillars, Komatsu's, Atlas Copcos of this world, who genuinely take what you've done and do it? And I think there is a whole range of commercial models that are possible. And I've just been looking at Bricks and Mortar website, actually, if you don't mind me saying, about how they do it. And I mean, one option, is that you sell packages that you can retrofit to trucks, that you can integrate, that you can be the systems engineer around. And I think that might be an even a better solution to really build the tech side of things. So I think there's still a piece missing. There's a really good business model because you can make money out of this sort of stuff. But the problem is you know, which piece of that supply chain do you end up owning?
Yeah, great point raised. Just related to that, I was going to ask for any other suggestions. We started talking about this, I guess, the working with big corporates and not getting entangled and being able to, there's some questions about the IP and other things coming through the chat, which I think we'd love to actually get out on the webinar live. But any advice from any of the startups about what's helped you work with large corporates in the face of some of the things that Gavin, Hugh, and others are talking about?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in there. So yeah, I mean, obviously from our perspective, it's great having somebody like Gavin on board and that sort of vision from Rio that we can work with. Definitely makes life easier for us. And I think even across other, I've been quite surprised actually how many mining companies are willing to come to us for solutions, and they really care about the solution. They're not after owning the IP, which has been quite surprising. I mean, we've had others, now that they've seen what we can do, they're coming to us to solve other problems for them. And they don't mind if we solve it for them, but then also, you know, sell it to others basically, which is great for us because we don't want to have just the one doing a bespoke solution just for one customer. And that's been quite refreshing from our side, just to see that they want a problem solved for them, but they don't mind if we then solve the problem for others as well.
Hey, we might just looking at the KP, please.
I was just going to add one more point would be, you know, in terms of working with corporates, as Hugh was mentioning, we've seen a few business models. One that I didn't mention that we found pretty interesting for robotics has been becoming the technology-enabled contractor in the business. It's so hard for me to sell you the robot. I'm just going to deliver the work. And that's easiest for me to actually learn. Unfortunately, that also goes hand in hand with capital intensity for a venture-backed startup. You know, could I have bought, you know, large haul trucks and automated them? Yeah, you could have, but it may not be a venture-backed business at that point. But if it's a small enough, you know, solution that you have, then you can do it. And that's one of the companies that just came out of stealth based in San Francisco here. Canvas does just that. And they are, you know, paving the way to see how would you go as a technology-enabled business if your product is actually a robot and they do drywall finishing. Yeah.
Well, one of the things we've certainly see in the early days of adoption in the robot space is the whole RaaS business model, robots as a service. And so there are times where you're going to face friction with either large or small customer where you've got a new technology, and especially in the automation space where you're working in kind of critical workflows. And one of the things I've seen work well to reduce some of the barriers of adoption is to actually offer your robot on a service basis. So if you're picking strawberries, how do you normally pay pickers for strawberries? Okay, let's replicate that same model. And the startup does have to raise a bit more capital to fund the development of that robot, but they're able to offer the end customer the same kind of budget budgeting process that they're used to.
Is Mike going funny on other people or just me?
Yeah.
Yep, same here.
That's a pain. Okay.
Eventful robot.
I'm going to just take over for a sec because I saw some of the questions that were coming through, and I think it might be Kieran. Do you mind just coming on, because you had some questions, and I agree with Sue that every organisation would benefit from a Gavin type. Gavin, you know, some of the things you said, I was writing them down, just gems, really. So wonderful.
You don't want too many of me.
No, I think it was perfect. But Kieran, do you want to ask some of your questions and some of your experience and what you'd like to know from the group?
Sure. Sorry, I was just spamming questions and that I thought were interesting. Coming from Laing, and Andrew's obviously on the line, it's really interesting to see what various companies are doing, particularly big ones with startups. So negotiating IP licenses for every single time is incredibly tedious. Most of the time what ends up happening is we were just sort of sent off to the legal department and never shall the legal and engineering departments talk to each other to understand what's going on. So that's one thing. And I also know that Coca-Cola Amatil, at least for a while, had a model for startups where they had accelerated procurement, payment terms, support, things like that. And really interesting to hear that Rio Tinto are sort of trying to go down that route as well. So I was curious as to if anybody's come across any other companies doing that and what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so I might have a crack at that one. So I've been on both sides of the fence and sat on the fence at various times in my career. So I used to be the VP for Innovation and Technology at Goldfields and deal directly with companies trying to sell you a new widget. Now, we didn't try and own any of the IP and it wasn't in our interest. We actually developed technology within the organization. We owned patents at certain times. And I spent a lot of my time trying to spin off those organizations, if you like, and I actually left Goldfields and actually did one of those. I thought the technology was so good. And so that goes to Hugh's point previously, is that sometimes mining companies will develop IP because they need a solution, but then they're not the ideal vehicle to take it forward, because the best way for that technology is for industry to develop, not the individual resource company at that particular point in time. But that does vary from mining company to mining company. I don't think there's one standard rule in that space. And in my time at Goldfields, I tried everything from doing hackathons to demo days, all those kind of things to try and see what would make a difference in an organization. The biggest challenge that I saw from companies trying to sell a new widget was that even though the new widget was better than the widget we were using, the integration cost was usually the thing that crippled the project. So even though you were producing something that was better and faster than what I was already using, the loss of productivity by putting that bit of kit in or changing that bit of technology was so much of a risk that we didn't want to do it. And so I used to encourage organizations to work with companies that we're already working with and say, look, collaborate with this company who already sells this widget. And if you can make it work without us having any risk of productivity loss, then that's the best way to get into that process. And that way we're not dealing with IP, we're not interested in IP, we just want to improve our productivity from that perspective.
Thanks for that, Paul. Sue, any comments you want to make in there? You're quite active again on the chats. That's what I was saying before when my daughter ramped up Netflix downstairs.
Oh, yeah, look, I think it's a minefield that people like Kieran have to navigate. It really sounds like, anyone dealing with Rio Tinto, how would you know that you need to be in contact with the pioneer labs? I mean, it's not like there's a directory going, these are the people who are easy to deal with within the organisation. And so I don't know that I have an answer, but I really liked Kieran's example from Coca-Cola Amatil, and I wonder whether that's something that we can maybe encourage people to do more of, because it does seem crazy when, particularly up in Queensland, 90% of Queenslanders work for companies that have 20 people or less. So it's a huge challenge for, the people that are actually employing the most Australians to find ways to engage with big corporates.
I mean, maybe we want to pick up that line as we shift to kind of the final minutes of our panel, unless are we doing okay on time, Rachel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
Yeah, is maybe just talk about some ideas and opportunities. So it could be, love to hear from folks. Either, how about this? You got two choices. Number one is what's coming? What's next? What are some technology planes that you're excited about? And then number two, if you had one idea, if you could be the grand wizard for a day and you could wave your hands, what could we do more of, or what could we start to help move industry forward? Love to hear thoughts.
Mike, I'll have a go at that. I've been thinking, listening to people chat about what the blockers are, why we're not better at this. So, you know, the big bad corporates do what corporates do, and I think it'd help if Kieran had a haircut and a shave when he was talking to his corporates. He'd get on just fine, and he'd find out he'd get his 14-day payment terms, and they wouldn't be claiming his IP and his kidneys and all of those sorts of things. So I do think there's an opportunity. I mentioned before that the university sector, the corporates that I work with don't value the universities locally here for their research. They value them for their talent pool. But we're missing an opportunity there. And I think the reason for that is when you go and negotiate with the university, they say, here's a piece of research that we've done. It's amazing. It's going to change the world. But actually it's a pile of papers, published, publications. And they think that that's worth 95% of the value of the thing that they're trying to spin out from that. And the entity who's looking to acquire it thinks that it's worth less than 5%. And you're a very long way apart in that negotiation. It makes it very difficult to do. So you need something in the middle there. So the universities need to be better at getting their stuff out the door. And I think the way to do that is with their talent. Give it to the students, let them commercialize it, form a startup. And then you also need a little bit of pull. The Pioneer Lab that we've been hearing about at Rio, Langerook's version is what we try and do in the group that Precian and Kieran came out of. We try and be a really good first customer for cutting edge stuff. And we're not perfect by any stretch, but we know that there are problems in there. And so there's always a point of contact you can go to smooth those through. So maybe it's like grease. What we need is grease. And I'm sure there's a more elegant way of explaining that, but I'm an engineer, so we'll just leave that for others to do. And if you can do that, then you capture the really big opportunities. So we work in construction tech. It's the last great undisrupted mega sector. It's 15 trillion Aussie dollars globally. And we still build stuff the same way that the pyramids were built, 5,000 years ago, right? So huge opportunities. And they're all around safety, quality, and productivity. Those are our three big drivers. Any of those three things, I can get Langerook's board to approve. Pretty much anything. Somebody has an alien machine that comes down that deals with one of those things, we can get a pilot program up to work on it.
So Andrew, I'm not sure all of that's fair anymore. I mean, I've just been looking at Bricks and Mortar website and all your portfolio companies. There's quite a lot of cool tech actually in the construction sector that I think is seeing the light of day. And then coming back to universities, we you know me at Sydney. We built a group that basically delivered finished products virtually, and then spun them out as a consequence. And I think you can, as long as you don't tell the university what you're doing. Right. We used to do it in spite of the university rather than because of. If only they knew what we were doing in unmanned combat aircraft and stuff like that.
Hugh, maybe you'd like to revisit a point you made when the panel got together before we were on this, live, which was around leadership, because I think that perhaps is the missing ingredient in terms of how we can move things forward.
Yeah, look, I think things have moved on now. I mean, when in the early days, I think there weren't. I mean, what I think was required at the start was a vision that, we didn't actually go to Rio. And in fact, we did go to Rio at one point and said, we'll build an automated truck. And they said, not interested. And actually, the thing really changed when we said, we will build an automated mine. And we will do the whole thing and it will take 20 years and so on. And they bought it. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's that kind of piece that we need to sometimes have. And you can almost, as a research group in, I don't know, in a university now, you ought to be able to say, okay, we're going to pick an industry and we'll transform it, top to bottom, the whole piece. It could be, I don't know, agriculture, construction, or whatever else it may be. And okay, you're not ever going to actually do it, but you can set the challenge around, you need all of these things to come together. You need the architecture, the operating system, the sensor technology, the automation, the machine learning, and so on to make that happen. And you will spin out a lot of companies along the way. And that's typically what happens. But it also gives you something that allows bigger companies to really take a bite out of it. And I suspect, you know, Laing O'Rourke is arguably some way in that direction already, right? It basically says, what would we have to do to transform the sector? And it's that point that you can properly engage with researchers and properly engage with, you know, I think that the whole community, small, big companies, startups, academia, we all need to come together around this. And I think we've been fortunate in Australia that we have managed to create a significant community that covers all of those bases.
And I think, you know, another thing, talent's been mentioned throughout here. And I want to say one of the biggest changes I've seen that gives me hope for the future is engineers actually want to go work at startups now. It didn't used to be like that back when Rachel was 13 and getting started with the Tech23s and all that. We used to be competing, you know, heavily with CBA and Macquarie Bank and all that. But now we're finding that you can inspire students and they do want to come work for you. So I wondered to the group, do we have enough talent in this country? And is there anything we should be doing there? And we'll have to wrap in just a couple minutes. So last comments from folks.
Yeah, I think we do have a bit of a brain drain. I mean, in the time that I spent into the US, I met more people in automation in Pittsburgh than I ever did in Australia in the leading up years. So it gives you an indication where the talent's going. And although some of these companies here online have attracted some of those people back to Australia now. This is true.
Yeah.
It's a good time to recruit.
And I thought that I will go to, and after Uber stole all my people, I thought I'd come back to Australia and go to QUT and some of those other universities and take people there. And they were telling me, no, I've got an interview with Uber in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to Pittsburgh, but I'm not going to work for you. I'm going to go work for them. What I was seeing was Australians leaving, and they all said, if we were doing something like that in Australia, I would come back. So it's a matter of the market pulling those Australians back in space. But and leading on to one of the other comments that was said before is that Australia is definitely awarded for the students it pumps out and not necessarily the research it does.
Yeah. Any last thoughts from what's been a terrific group?
I'll concur. Definitely has a talent. And I think part of the journey that I've seen is there's talent that is then coupled with capital, at least seed stage capital. And then part of the reason why there is a little bit of brain drain is that for the next stage of that phase, when you're attracting journalist investors, at least for the US ones, you would want US presence. And I think we were trying to say maybe that's not really the right reason for your presence. And there is ways to get maturity out there and develop your solution without requiring that and getting journalists and investor interested for the next phase of the company. So we're bullish on that thesis. And if not, then we'll just raise a bigger, better fund and figure out, ourselves.
I would even just really briefly add to that the mining sector in Australia is losing people to the Australian startup sector in droves. And I don't necessarily think that's such a bad thing. I think it's more a reflection on people in startups are doing really meaningful work. They're trying to tackle genuine global issues. And I think that sort of hits the human being right to their core. And so the Groundhog Day grind in my industry isn't as attractive as it might have been once upon a time. And we're losing a lot of people to startups. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing.
On that note, Gavin, I think unless someone wants to, I reckon that was a perfect note to end on. What do you reckon?
Yeah, perfect. I just want to thank everyone for their contribution. Thanks for the questions and your attention, and really excited about what we can continue to do together to continue to build a world-leading industry and set of industries here out of Australia. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Mike, for leading what was really just, a wonderfully interesting conversation. I want to thank the generosity of all of the contributors, especially KP, who's coming in at very interesting times for him. So we thank you all very much.